Well, hey, this is Eddie McCain, and right now I'm in Sunbury, Georgia, on the banks of the Sedway River, which is not really a river. I was having a conversation a couple of days ago with a park ranger down here, and he told me this is actually an inlet, that this is salt water. And while I initially thought it was a river that ran into the Atlantic Ocean, he told me, no, it's not a river. They call it a river. It says river on the map, but in actuality, it's an inlet. But I want to talk with you about a man by the name of Moses Allen, who was a pastor and a chaplain for the Continental Army back during the Revolutionary War. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about where we are here. This is Sunbury, Georgia, which back during the 1700s was a thriving port town. As you can see, it's not a town here anymore, and it's not a port here anymore. But at one time, this here was a deep water port where ships from all over the world came in here bringing in finished goods, and ships left here with tea and rice and indigo, exporting them all over the world. This was a deep water port right here, one of the largest deep water ports on the East Coast. And when we declared our independence during the first Congress, delegates wanted to build a fort here, which I shot a video from Fort Morris here a couple days ago, and it was right up there somewhere. And the fort was built there to protect this port. But during the Revolutionary War, the British were actually able to capture Savannah, which is about 25 miles from here, and they were able to capture this little port city of Sunbury. And the British turned what used to be a town here, a regular town, they turned it into like a prison town. And when they captured colonial officers, they would bring them to Sunbury, and they were actually treated fairly well. They were not put behind bars. They were like on parole, but they had to stay in Sunbury, and they couldn't, of course, they couldn't go back and fight for the American Army. But if you were enlisted, they would put you in prison. And in most cases, POWs were put on prison ships. They didn't really have a lot of prisons built at that time. So the British Army would take a ship and they would put it a mile or two out in the water, just like where we're standing here. And that is where they would put their prisoners. And you can read about the horror stories of prison ships that were in New York City Harbor during the Revolutionary War. They had prison ships, I believe, in Charleston, Savannah, even as far down south as St. Augustine, Florida. And that is where they put the enlisted. Now, I say all that to say this here in regard to Moses Allen. Moses Allen was a pastor, and he was also a chaplain for the Continental Army. And Moses Allen had a reputation with the British for preaching hard against King George III, preaching against tyranny. He was a very pro-liberty pastor, and he was definitely not a typical today's 501c3 preacher, that's for sure. And he had a reputation among the British. And when General Prevost brought the British troops out of Florida, out of St. Augustine up here into Georgia, they captured Savannah. They went and found the Congregational Church in Midway, Georgia, which is not far from here. I actually shot a video of the church earlier this morning. That is where Moses Allen was actually the pastor. They went and burned his church down. They captured him, but instead of paroling him like they did the other officers and bringing him here to Sunbury, they put him on a prison ship. He spent, this was in this was around January I forgot the year now, 1777, I believe. But he'd been on the prison ship probably about a month. And if you ever do any research on British prison ships during the Revolutionary War, you will learn that they were some nasty places. There were more American POWs that died on British prison ships than were soldiers who died in combat against the British Army. And that's a fact. The ships were nasty. They were full of diseases. They didn't halfway feed them. And most people that were on a prison ship, they eventually died before the war ended. Well, they put Moses Allen. They had such disdain against him because of his preaching against King George III and preaching against tyranny. They put him on a prison ship. And he'd been on that prison ship a little over a month. I know it was in the month of February when he saw his opportunity to try to escape, and so he jumped overboard. Could have been out there if it was here. I mean, right here was Sunbury, the prison town for officers, so very well could have been out there a mile or two. And tried to make his escape and jumped overboard. You can imagine he was probably fully clothed. You know, had his shoes on, clothes on, so you know that the water logged him down. It's February, so his water was probably cold. He was probably already fatigued from being a prisoner, malnourished. I know he hadn't eaten very well, so he was weak. Bottom line is, he didn't make it. He drowned. And his body washed up on shore. Could have been anywhere out here somewhere. And some Americans found his body, and they went up to a captain, a British captain, sea captain, and asked for some lumber to build a coffin for Moses Allen so they could give him a burial. And the captain refused to give them any lumber. I'm not really sure why they had to ask for lumber. You would have thought maybe they had lumber, but I asked this question to a park ranger down here, and he said at that time the British had pretty well destroyed everything. All the homes were pretty well burned down. There wasn't a whole lot left, so they probably didn't really have the lumber to build the coffin with. But anyway, the British sea captain refused to give them any lumber, ordered a couple of his sailors to get rid of the body, and they took Moses Allen somewhere to an area like this here, a marsh area, and they just tossed his body into the marsh and left him there. Well, the Americans found him. They couldn't give him a normal burial because they didn't have the wood to build a coffin, so they took him out into the water and gave him a sea burial. But that's the story of Moses Allen, one of the many unsung heroes of the Revolutionary War who gave their life 250 years ago so that today you and I can live in liberty. This is why it's so important that we recognize July 4th, Independence Day, for what it is. It's not just a day to grill hamburgers and go to the park, go to the lake and have a good time. It's to remember the Moses Allens of this world, the other American POWs during the Revolutionary War who died in British prison ships. You know, they died for us. They died for our freedom, for our liberty. And we need to always remember them. Never take what we have for granted, because, you know, we can lose freedom and liberty, you know, just as quick as we won it when we defeated the British Army in the 8-year war against them for our liberty and freedom. But anyway, this is Eddie McCain, ABC American History, and I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about Moses Allen, and I hope you have a good day.